Among the American military traditions begun in the earliest months of the Revolutionary War was a distinct uniform for generals. A blue coat, lined and faced with buff, a creamy tan color, with gilded buttons and breeches and waistcoat to match, distinguished American generals beyond the War of 1812. George Washington, by his own personal example and his orders, codified this tradition. Washington attended the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia in May 1775 as a delegate from Virginia. There he stood out wearing the uniform of the Fairfax Independent Company. 8 months earlier, George Mason chaired a meeting of a number of gentlemen and freeholders of Fairfax County in the colony of Virginia on Wednesday, the 21st day of September 1774, where they agreed to form a uniformed company. Together, these gentlemen agreed to dress in a regular uniform of blue turned up with buff, with plain yellow metal buttons, buff waistcoat, and breeches. Washington took a keen interest in training and equipping this company prior to the outbreak of the war. He wrote to merchants in Philadelphia requesting uniform trimmings like epaulets, as well as texts on military exercise for both his own company and that of neighboring Prince William County. George Washington could have easily chosen to wear his old blue coat with red lapels and silver lace, as he had worn as a provincial colonel in the 7 Years' War and as a Virginia militia officer in the following decade. This uniform would have evoked his military experience, extending back 2 decades. This was impressive for an American gentleman only 43 years old. Yet George Washington wore his Fairfax Independent Company uniform on June 15th as he accepted the unanimous vote of the Continental Congress to be the general appointed to command all the Continental forces raised or to be raised for the defense of American liberty. In the days that followed, as Washington met with his fellow appointees, like Major General Philip Schuyler, he likely promoted this dress. His first written orders about general officers' uniforms on July 14, 1775, only prescribed silk ribbons worn over the waistcoat as rank distinctions among generals and staff. Washington reaffirms the blue and buff uniform with epaulet rank distinctions in general orders on June 18, 1780. By that time, blue and buff was already the norm for Continental Army generals. In dozens of portraits, especially by artists like Charles Willson Peale, generals not only followed Washington's color scheme, they also followed his preference for a neat and plain style, omitting gold lace or embroidery, opting for simple buttonholes carefully worked in silk. But why blue and buff? Blue and buff certainly weren't the only American options. Blue coats with red lapels had much deeper American roots, with provincials, like the Jersey Blues, Sentinels from Massachusetts Bay, or Washington's own Virginia Regiment wearing this uniform back during the 7 Years' War. Brown was another option. Shortly after the Continental Congress recommended brown coats with regimental distinctions on November 5, 1775, Washington ordered his officers to follow suit and match the clothing of the men. Even scarlet coats were surprisingly popular among the gentlemen's independent companies as they took a stand for their rights. Blue and buff were off the beaten path relative to the British Army and American service as provincials. Blue and buff served as a convenient uniform for Captain John Lamb's New York Artillery Company in the summer of 1775. It provided a distinction always held up between the artillery and companies of foot in the 1st New York Regiment, to which the New York Provincial Congress attached his company. Buff-colored breeches and waistcoats had been popular among British and American provincial officers in the 7 Years' War, providing an updated appearance to the traditional scarlet breeches and facing-colored waistcoats. The New London, Connecticut Independent Company voted to wear blue and buff at the same time gentlemen of Fairfax County formed their association in the same uniform. The New London gentlemen initially fell into the fashion faux pas of buff jackets and blue breeches before updating their look at their September 5, 1774 meeting with white breeches and waistcoats. In the British military, the fashion of buff for waistcoats and breeches had already passed by 1768, when a new royal warrant formalized the prevailing fashion of white waistcoats and breeches for the majority of regiments. For Americans, buff was a legitimate color for military waistcoats and breeches, while not being directly tied to British regulars or ministerial troops. Buff-colored waistcoats and leather breeches had a following among the British Whigs in Parliament, who enjoyed their equestrian and outdoor pursuits proudly. Americans cast their struggle for rights, and subsequently independence, as one of Whigs versus Tories or Loyalists, adopting these British political distinctions. Washington's preference for a neat and plain style, omitting gold lace and other old-fashioned trappings of rank, followed this Whig fashion even as it fit this moment in America. George Washington Parke Custis, who grew up with Martha and George Washington as his adopted parents, recalled in 1848 that blue and buff, the ancient Whig colors of England, were adopted by Washington as the uniform of the company that he first commanded in the dawn of our troubles with the mother country. Blue and buff, as the fashionable color of Whigs, may have actually followed Washington's example rather than informing it. But for Washington and the other gentlemen freeholders of Fairfax County, Virginia, their agreement on a uniform closely correlated with their agreement on principles. Their association, their company, and their uniform were expressly to defend against the destruction of our civil rights and liberty and all that is dear to British subjects and freemen. Despite these other options, blue and buff won out, becoming the iconic colors of generalship and American military leadership in the United States well into the next century. Perhaps, just as Washington was the man of the hour on June 15, 1775, so too blue and buff were the right colors for this American cause. In selecting this uniform to wear to the Continental Congress, he showed his willingness to provide fresh military leadership in defense of America's rights, rather than couching his credentials in the past. Washington himself may be part of the explanation of the success of blue and buff. As Washington came to personify American military leadership, a leadership that served the Continental Congress rather than attempting to supplant it, so too his chosen uniform became an icon of that leadership, one emulated by his peers and for generations after.